Chapter 18 in Duff introduces you to a small group of verbs whose endings are not new, but perhaps not configured quite the way you would expect them. There are 4 that fall into this category: dunamai, kemai, kathemai, and oida. Dunamai, I am able. Kemai, I lie. Kathemai, I sit. The important thing here is they're what we call defective verbs. What that signifies is they don't have all tense forms. What have we got for dunamai? Dunamai, dunasai, dunatai, dunamatha, dunastha, dunantai. Those endings might look familiar. You'll notice under luo, I've given you a duplicated example. That's because lelumai, lelusai, lelutai, lelumatha, lelustha, leluntai. You've got the perfect middle or passive here. But the present with dunamai. So the present tense of dunamai uses what you'd expect to find in the perfect. And that is endings very similar to luomai in the present, but without that thematic vowel, that vowel joining the mai to the stem. You're then limited, because you've already used those perfect endings, you're then limited into what else you can do in the past tense. So there's only one past tense available for dunamai. And if we compare it with luo, you'll again see the pattern. We'll augment both to start, and then let's have a look at the endings. Adunamen, adunaso, adunato, adunamatha, adunastha, adunanto. Quick change. Let's sneak that duplication back in there, and the endings will again look familiar. What you've now got is the same endings as the pluperfect, middle and passive, versus the imperfect or generic past tense of dunamai. So the present uses perfect endings, the imperfect past tense uses the pluperfect endings, and you haven't got an aorist or a pluperfect or a perfect to worry about. You can put these into the future, extending them with s as you would in any other dunersamai, but that's regular, so not given to you in the book. They don't have all of their tense forms. The same pattern goes for kemai and kathemai. Along the same pattern, you've got oida. Now, these are all quite regular verbs. Being able to do something, sitting down, lying down, knowing things. These are all quite common. Oida is completely weird. You are given oida, oidas, oide, oidamen, oidate, oidasin. I learned oida, oyster, oide, ismen, iste, isasin. You will get that in some places. This is the classical version. Hideously irregular. So what you've got first of all is a regularisation into something that has got oid at the front and then straightforward endings. Again, those endings have come from the perfect. Leluka, lelukas, leluke, lelukamen, lelukata, lelukasin. Same endings there. You've then got what people call the imperfect of oida. This again augments the stem. So you get aired. That makes sense and isn't too bizarre. And then you add the endings that you might expect for a pluperfect. Erdain, erdace, erday, erdamen, erdata, erdason, with iota subscripts under all the augments. That diphthong is characteristic of your pluperfect. So keep an eye open. That diphthong is characteristic of the pluperfect. So oida uses the perfect endings for the present and the pluperfect endings for the imperfect. You already know another word for know, though. You know ginosko. Now, if you've listened to me talking about Greek morphology, you'll know that sk is a process marker. What's the difference between ginosko and oida? And I wonder, oida is by definition got an aspect of the perfect underneath it. That transformative, you have come to know something, therefore you know it and you cannot unknow it. Whereas ginosko's got that fundamental morphological marker saying this process, this is getting to know. Can you in the New Testament differentiate between getting to know something and knowing it as a transformative process? These are used pretty interchangeably, but I think there are places when you talk about things like having come to know God, therefore not being able to unknow him, where you may get a difference in sense between ginosko and oida being played on in the New Testament. This is something I'm still working on a little bit, but it interests me that you've got two words for know in Greek, both of which are heavily marked in different ways. Ginosko with its process marker and its root aorist, and oida with its perfective, defective state. It's worth looking at the other moods for oida as well. You've got quite a strange infinitive, aidonai, and it's worth comparing these with eonai, which is to go in an irregular classical version, and anai, to be. It's worth knowing these as three irregular infinitives, to know, to go, and to be. In other moods, it also looks very similar to horao. You've got aidon as the aorist and airdain as the past tense imperfect version of that. Idain and aidonai and idon and aidos. Aidos declines aidos, aiduia, eidos, like a perfect participle like lelukos, lelukuia, lelukos. So there's lots of epsilons, iotas floating around, and you need to differentiate clearly between seeing and knowing. There are occasional places where they cross over. And it is worth thinking about this a little bit more closely. What you've actually got with oida is, and originally you've got woida, and that is your digamma, and digamma makes a w sound, and that leads to the Latin video, for example, which will be pronounced video, which means I see. So woida and video are the same root, wid, so that actually seeing and knowing, this is sight and insight knowledge. So there is actually a sense to oida that is knowledge as insight and not just as a cognitive thing that you can see in the history of the word with its digamma, woida giving the Latin video. Not only do horao and oida look very similar, in fact identical at various places, but there is in fact an etymological history between the two.